Imagine this. You're standing on a stage. The lights are harsh. The crowd invisible beyond the blinding glare. Every fiber of your being urges you to perform, to be impressive, articulate, flawless. You smile, say the right words, echo the expectations that have been fed to you since childhood. Applause follows, but deep inside, something is missing. Not just missing a king. You retreat backstage, alone, and the silence is unbearable, because in that silence, there's a whisper you can't ignore. Who are you when no one is watching? It's a terrifying question, isn't it? What if you're not who you think you are? What if the self you've spent years building your beliefs, your opinions, your social persona isn't you at all, but a fragile construct meant to survive, to be liked, to feel significant in a world of mirrors? Carl Jung called this the tyranny of the egonaut. Just arrogance or self-importance, as pop culture suggests, but the artificial center of identity you mistake for your true self. The ego is clever, subtle, seductive. It says, you are what you do. You are what they think of you. You are your success, your failure, your appearance, your reputation. And you believe it. You dress it up in achievements. You defend it in arguments. You polish it with praise and validate it through validation. But slowly, without noticing, you become its prisoner. It tells you not to speak your truth because truth is dangerous. It tells you to be liked because love must be earned. It tells you to win because losing means you don't matter. But what if this entire game, the striving, the pleasing, the performingus, a betrayal? Not of others, but of yourself? What if the ego isn't your savior, but your captor? There's a paradox here. So disorienting, it's almost cruel. The more you try to be someone, the further you drift from who you actually are. You succeed, but feel hollow. You fit in, but feel fake. You're celebrated, but feel unknown even to yourself. Why? Because the ego doesn't want truth. It wants control. It doesn't seek growth. It seeks comfort. It doesn't care if you're free. It only wants to survive. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've called me was never truly yours. The dreams you chased, the wounds you covered, the persona you protect, all carefully constructed to avoid the raw, chaotic truth that lives underneath. Are you living your life or performing it? This is the existential weight. Jung tried to expose the idea that modern humans, in our obsession with identity and status and security, have severed ourselves from the deeper self, the part of us that is ancient, wild, mysterious, and whole. He warned that when the ego dominates, you don't become more yourself. You become a ghost defined not by essence, but by image. And here's the terrifying part. You won't notice. Not at first. The ego doesn't scream. It whispers. It flatters. It rationalizes. It tells you you're better than others, and then makes you feel inferior the next day. It builds your sense of self atop ever-shifting ground. Likes, titles, beauty, belonging. It pretends to protect you, but only deepens your fear. And the world rewards it. The world needs your ego. It needs you to buy, compete, compare, conform. It needs you to be afraid of being forgotten. That's how it sells you meaning. But meaning can't be bought, and the self can't be fabricated. So what now? Can you escape something that lives inside your very mind? Can you kill the ego without killing yourself? Is the ego even realer? Just a mask so convincing? You forgot it was never your face? And if you were to take it off piece by trembling piece, what would be left? A void? A monster? Or maybe something sacred? What if beneath the ego isn't emptiness, but freedom? You've felt it before, haven't you? In fleeting moments. A silent walk through the woods. A conversation that goes deeper than words. A sudden burst of awe under the stars. Times when you weren't performing or protecting or posturing, you were just being timeless, boundless, real. Jung called that the self, not your social self, not your job title, not your curated identity, but the deeper self that lives outside of roles, outside of language, beneath the ego's camouflage. And here's the great tragedy. Most people will never meet it. They'll live their whole lives behind a mask. They'll die without ever having lived from the core, because the ego, while imaginary, is persuasive. It tells you that without it, you'll be nothing. But maybe, just maybe, that's the point. To become nothing, to unmake the illusion, to walk naked into the unknown, and find, not annihilation, but integration. You can already feel the discomfort rising, can't you? That's the ego squirming, defending itself. It wants to turn away, to minimize, rationalize, scroll past. But what if this discomfort is the very doorway? What if everything you fear losing was never you to begin with? Keep walking, because behind the facade, beneath the stories, and beyond the ego, is the part of you that has been waiting all along. The ego is not your enemy because it's evil. It's your enemy because it's terrified, and it has every reason to be. From the moment you entered the world, your self-raw, whole, undefined was too much, too loud, too honest, too vulnerable. So the world began its slow sculpting. Don't cry like that. Be a good boy. Nice girls don't do that. That's not what people like. Stop being weird. Fit in. Be somebody. And so, piece by piece, you abandoned yourself. Not by choice, but by necessity. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote that the greatest form of suffering is not from the world, but from the self's alienation from itself. But how does this alienation happen? Carl Jung saw it clearly. As we grow, we develop a persona or social mask crafted to survive, to gain approval, to function. It isn't fake, it's partial. It's a compromise between who we are and who we're allowed to be. But here's the danger. Eventually, the mask forgets it's a mask, and the ego, the manager of this mask, convinces you it's the whole truth, that you are only what you can control, what you can prove, what others can recognize. You become not a person, but a performance. And slowly, a war begins inside you. The ego becomes like a politician obsessed with public image. It doesn't want truth, it wants approval. It silences the parts of you that don't fit the narrative. The rage, the grief, the mystery, the contradictions. It buries them in the unconscious. But nothing buried stays buried forever. Jung warned that what you resist persists. The more you repress your inner world to preserve the ego's image, the more your psyche rebels. In dreams, in addictions, in depression, in inexplicable anxiety, in that eerie sense that you're living someone else's life. And society rewards this insanity. We're raised in cultures that worship the individual, but define individuality through competition, image, and status. We're told to be ourselves, but punished for not conforming. We live in an age that exalts self-expression, yet most expression is curated, filtered, and sold for attention. A paradox Jean-Paul Sartre would call bad faith, where we pretend to be free while actively denying our freedom. So the ego thrives in a world like this, because the world needs us to be predictable. It needs us to behave, to buy, to follow scripts. The wild, undefined self, that's a threat. You can't sell to it. You can't shame it. You can't market identity to someone who no longer believes they need one. The ego, then, becomes not just a personal construction, but a cultural product. And what's worse, it feels natural. because it was built so early. Its voice sounds like yours. Its fears feel like intuition. Its desires echo your own. But dig deeper, and you'll realize most of what you call yourself was inherited, imposed, or absorbed. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly in his critiques of morality and identity. He said most people are unconscious actors, repeating values they never questioned, chasing goals they didn't choose, living lives of quiet imitation. His antidote? The Übermensch, the one who dares to create values from within, not from ego, but from self. And yet, how do you even begin to tell the difference? The ego speaks first and loudest. It speaks in comparison, jealousy, fear, judgment. It defines success through recognition. It defines failure through exposure, and it feeds on the illusion of control. The self speaks quietly. It whispers through intuition, synchronicity, discomfort. It doesn't flatter. It calls. And answering that call usually means loss of certainty, of approval, of the person you think you are. Jung called this descent into the unconscious, the individuation process, the path to becoming whole. Not perfect, not successful. Whole, a terrifying, sacred journey where the ego is no longer the captain, but the student. But our modern world offers no initiation for this, no roadmap for integrating the shadow, no ritual for dying to the false self and being reborn. We treat breakdowns as pathology, not thresholds. We medicate the symptoms instead of asking why the soul is crying out. Because to question the ego is to question everything. Your goals, your career, your relationships, your sense of worth, your beliefs about success, love, even God. And that is dangerous to a mind built on safety. But here's the deeper truth. Your suffering is not the problem. Your fear, your sadness, your doubt, they are not dysfunctions. They are signals, echoes from the self, reminders that something vital has been low stand. It's time to remember. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, said that despair is suffering without meaning, and the ego cannot offer meaning. Only status, only distraction, only survival. But the self wants depth. It wants to transform, not cope. It wants truth, even if it costs everything. So when you feel like your life is unraveling, when your goals feel empty, when your achievements no longer satisfy, when your reflection feels like a strange it may not be failure, it may be the beginning of remembering, a collapse of the false center, the end of the illusion. But beware. The ego doesn't die quietly. It will fight for its survival. It will disguise itself as reason, as pragmatism, even as spirituality. It will say, "This is dangerous." It will say, "You're being dramatic." It will say, "Just keep going." Because if you stop, if you truly listen, you might hear something else. Something ancient. Something real. And that would change everything. You think you're living, but in truth, you're performing survival. And it's exhausting, because the ego doesn't sleep. It doesn't rest. It doesn't allow stillness. Stillness is dangerous. Invites awareness. And awareness threatens the entire structure. So it keeps you moving, chasing, comparing, correcting. It dangles an ever-receding finish line. Once you achieve this, then you'll feel whole. Once they finally see you, then you'll be free. But wholeness never comes, because the ego's hunger is infinite. You can feed it applause, followers, diplomas, wealth, relationships, and for a moment, it purrs. But then emptiness. Again. As if you're trying to quench a thirst with sand. Why? Because the ego doesn't want truth. It wants identity. And identity by nature must be fixed, stable, predictable. But you yourself are fluid, changing, wild. So to keep the identity alive, you must constantly suppress the parts of yourself that don't fit the script. And this suppression has a cost. You begin to live in fragmentation, like a shattered mirror, held together with invisible glue. Outwardly, things look fine, normal even, but internally, you're split. You show confidence while silently collapsing under self-doubt. You express love while fearing abandonment so deeply you never fully open. You smile in photos while secretly wondering if anyone truly knows you. This silent fracture between the self and the ego is not just philosophical, it's biological. The nervous system senses when we are lying to ourselves. It detects when our words, actions, and emotions are misaligned. This creates a state of chronic inner tension, what psychologists call cognitive dissonantia war, between what we say we believe and what we actually feel. And this war keeps the body in a low-level stress response. Adrenaline, cortisol, shallow breathing, tight muscles. You become a walking performance, braced for attack, afraid of being seen too clearly or not seen at all. This is where it gets sinister, because you start to believe that this tension is just life. You normalize it. You even glorify it. The hustle, the grind, the push to be more, do more, achieve more. But beneath that noise is a growing silence, a numbness. Your emotional range narrows. You stop crying, or laughing, or caring. Life becomes a script. You go through the motions. Even your passions, your hobbies, your relationships, your creativity become things to optimize, to prove, to display. You don't feel your life anymore. You manage it. And this spiritual dullness, this silent, creeping erosion of vitality, is the ego's most devastating cost. It kills your aliveness in the name of safety. It kills your authenticity in the name of belonging. It kills your mystery in the name of certainty. Aldous Huxley warned us about this in Brave New World. He imagined a society not oppressed by violence, but by pleasure, where people were not forced into conformity but seduced into it, where truth wasn't hidden, but drowned in irrelevance. The ego thrives in such a world. It offers stimulation without depth, validation without connection, comfort without consciousness. You may think you're immune, that you're too smart to be manipulated. But think about this. When was the last time you did something not to be seen, validated, or recorded? When was the last time you sat in silence without reaching for your phone? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be bad at something truly bad and still loved yourself? The ego hates all of this because it cannot survive invisibility, silence, or failure. And so, unconsciously, it shapes your choices. You avoid risk not because you're cautious, but because failure would shatter the image. You seek relationships not for intimacy, but for emotional proof that you matter. You chase goals not for fulfillment, but to outrun a quiet, unspoken dread. That dread, that gnawing sense of something's not right, is the voice of the self calling from beneath the ego's grip. But instead of listening, you self-medicate. With scrolling, with busyness, with alcohol, with productivity, with perfection, and society claps. Because your suffering looks like success. But there's another consequence even darker. One few dare speak aloud. You begin to fear yourself. Not just your flaws, but your depth. Because if you were to peel back the ego's mask, what might you find? Repressed memories, unmet needs, unspoken grief, buried rage, unlived desires, uncomfortable truths. The parts of you that were exiled because they didn't fit the image. The wild, strange, powerful parts. The ones society never taught you how to hold. So you keep them locked away. But like all things denied, they do not die. They distort. This is what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of everything your ego cannot accept. And here lies the irony. The more you suppress the shadow, the more it controls you. You become passive-aggressive instead of angry, anxious instead of intuitive, addicted instead of expressive, obsessed with control because you've lost touch with trust. And the world becomes your mirror, reflecting back your disowned parts through others. You hate in others what you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. The loud, the emotional, the lazy, the arrogant, the weird. They trigger you because they are you, in disguise. This is not philosophy anymore. This is your daily life. The ego doesn't just shape how you think. It shapes how you see. It alters your reality, your perception, your sense of what's possible. It narrows your vision until all that exists is survival, image, and control. And you call it normal, but deep down, you know better. You've felt glimpses, in dreams, in love, in grief, in art, in moments of unbearable beauty or unspeakable pain. Times when the ego dissolved and something truer emerged, wordless, wild, real. And every time, the ego returned. Faster, louder, more cunning, because it knows. The closer you get to the self, the closer it is to death. So it will distract you, scare you, shame you, seduce you. But now, you're beginning to see it, to name it, to witness its pattern. And seeing this sacred rupture in illusion is the beginning of power. But it's not enough to see the trap. You must break it. And for that, you'll need to rebel. You've spent your whole life serving a tyrant dressed as a protector. And now, it's time for war. Not with the world. Not with other people. Not even with the ego itself. The rebellion begins with truth. Not dramatic, self-aggrandizing truth. Not the kind you post to signal your awakening. No. The quiet kind. The kind you speak alone, to your own reflection at 2 a.m., when no one's watching and there's nowhere left to hide. It sounds like, I'm not happy. I don't know who I am. This life doesn't feel like mine. I am exhausted from pretending. And then, silence. Not the kind filled with answers, but the kind that burns. The kind that reveals how much of you has been trapped beneath roles, masks, and borrowed dreams. This moment is sacred because it is here the self begins to stir. And it does not speak the ego's language. It doesn't speak in plans or goals or validations. It speaks in longings, a desire to feel again, a hunger for solitude, a whisper that says, there's more, a pull towards something undefined, but deeply familiar. This is your rebellion, not with fists, but with refusal. Refusal to keep numbing. Refusal to keep chasing things you don't love. Refusal to wear a mask one more day. It's terrifying, because the ego has always offered certainty, even if that certainty was misery. And now, you're stepping into the unknown. But as Carl Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who they told you to be, not who your trauma made you, not the polished mask you built to survive. You. And to find that self, you must walk the path the ego fears most. Sona, not giving up, letting go, of image, of control, of needing to be someone. You stop managing life like a brand. You stop curating every moment. You stop asking, what will they think? And start asking, what is true? Truth becomes your compass. And truth is often ugly, awkward, inconvenient, but it's real. And realness is radioactive to the ego. That's why authenticity feels so powerful when you see it. A person not posturing, not performing, just being. It disrupts the room. It shakes people because it reminds them of what they've buried. To walk this path, you must be willing to disappoint, to lose status, to unsettle people, to be misunderstood, because the path to yourself is not upward, it's inward. It's not achievement, it's integration. You begin to reclaim the parts you exiled, the anger, the shame, the joy, the play. You stop calling them bad or weak and start listening to them like lost children. You say to the rage, "What are you protecting me from?" To the grief, "What have I refused to mourn?" To the envy, "What do you show me about my unlived life?" And slowly, the self emerges not as an idea, but as an experience. You stop performing your identity and start feeling it. You stop living in abstraction and return to sensation, to breath, to body, to instinct, to the untamed intelligence that doesn't need permission. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not perfection, but wholeness. The integration of all you are, light and shadow, chaos and order, wound and wisdom. But it isn't solitary, because once you touch your own depths, you begin to see others differently, not as threats, not as competition, but as mirrors. The woman you envy, she shows you what you're afraid to pursue. The man you judge, he holds the freedom you've denied yourself. The people you can't stand, they reflect the pieces you've exiled. And this too is part of the rebellion, reclaiming the collective self, because the ego lives in separation. It must. It defines itself against others. I am not like them. I am better. I am worse. I am special. I am right. But the self sees oneness and paradox. It sees that you are not better than anyone, and also not less. That you contain every archetype, every possibility, the lover and the loner, the coward and the warrior, the sinner and the saint. So the rebellion becomes compassion, not as weakness, but as the ultimate defiance. Compassion for your pain, for your flaws, for the people who hurt you because they too were acting from ego, from fear, from exile. But don't confuse rebellion with ease. The ego will not vanish overnight. It will adapt. It will spiritualize. It will wear new masks. Look how awakened I am. Look how humble. Look how healed. You must stay vigilant. Keep returning to truth. Keep asking, who am I performing for right now? Keep pausing before you speak and asking, is this my voicer, my fear? You build a life, not of certainty, but of integrity, where your inner and outer worlds align, where your yes means yes, and your no means no, where you no longer betray yourself for approval. And slowly, the world shifts, because when one person rebels from within, it disrupts the whole matrix. It gives others permission to feel, to question, to wake up. This is not a philosophy, it's a practice. And you'll forget. You'll relapse into performance, into people-pleasing, into image, but you'll remember faster each time. And that remembering, that sacred act of returning to yourself, is the revolution. So let the ego rage. Let it throw its tantrums. Let it mourn its fading control. You are not killing it. You are decentering it. You are putting the self back on the throne. And from that throne, you will not dominate. You will not conquer. You will create, not for applause, not for recognition, but because creation is what the self does. It dances. It sings. It weeps. It writes. It lives. And life, your life, longer needs to be performed. It needs only to be lived. There's a silence that falls when the mask finally drops. A sacred hush, like the world itself is holding its breath. You stand there stripped, raw, unedited. Not what you've achieved, not what you've proven, not what others want you to be. Just you. And it hits like a wave you didn't see coming. There was never anything wrong with you. Not in the beginning. Not in your wildness. Not in your sensitivity. Your confusion. Your contradictions. All the things the ego tried to sculpt, correct, and conceal, they were never flaws. They were never broken. They were truth. You were whole before the world convinced you otherwise. Before the conditioning, the roles, the fear. Before you learned to trade authenticity for acceptance. Before you learned to silence the voice inside that whispered, "This isn't me." Carl Jung understood this not as metaphor, but as medicine. He knew the truth wasn't something to be achieved, it was something to be remembered. He wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And now you see what that truly means. Everything you were chasing out there, validation, purpose, love, identity, it was never lost. It was simply buried. Under the rubble of who you were told to be, the final realization is not an answer. It's a return to presence, to being, to the self that was there, all along watching quietly as you wore the ego like armor. It never judged, never punished, never shamed. It waited patiently, like a parent watching a child play dress-up, knowing the costumes would one day be outgrown. And now that day has come. The ego will resist this truth. It always does. It will whisper, "This is too simple. You're just romanticizing." It will ask, "But who will you become if you stop striving?" It will panic, because it cannot survive in this light. It needs a problem, a pursuit, a person to impress, a flaw to fix. It needs tension to maintain its illusion of importance. But in the silence of this realization, there is no tension. There is only being. Unperformed, undeniable, undivided. And in that being, you discover something even more profound. You are not just yourself. You are a vessel for something vast, something ancient and eternal that lives through you. Call it soul. Call it the unconscious. Call it the divine. Jung called it the self with a capital S, the totality of all that you are and all that you're becoming. And it's not limited to your name, your face, your story. It flows through you like music through an instrument. You are not the music. You are not even the instrument. You are the space where the song happens. This is the great paradox. The ego spent a lifetime trying to prove you are someone. The self knows you are everyone and also no one at all. You are the canvas and the paint, the mask and the actor, the wave and the ocean. And in that realization, the fear of death begins to dissolve. Not because you believe in an afterlife, not because you have answers, but because you see, you were never born. Not in the way the ego defines it. You are not a static object moving through time. You are a process, a verb, a becoming. The self cannot be destroyed. It transforms. And in that transformation, you finally taste freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want. The freedom to no longer need to be anyone. To be empty, so life can fill you. To be still, so insight can arise. To be lost, so the path can reveal itself. This is the ultimate rebellion, and also the ultimate surrender. To live without armor, without a script, without the exhausting need to manage how you're perceived. Because you now understand, you were never here to prove your worth. You were here to remember it. You were never here to perform your identity. You were here to reclaim your being. And in this final act of surrender, something miraculous happens. Life becomes alive again. The smallest things shimmer with meaning. The way sunlight filters through the trees. The sound of laughter. The warmth of your own breath. Things you overlooked in the ego's frantic chase now stop you in your tracks. Not because they're new, but because you are. Reborn not as a better version of your mask, but as someone who no longer needs one. And from this space, love emerges not as romance, but as recognition. You see yourself in others, not their personas, but their buried truths, their wounded innocence, their divine chaos. You no longer need to win, impress, or correct them. You simply hold space. This is not detachment. This is depth. This is what it means to live from the self. To engage the world not through roles, but through presence. And it changes everything. You speak slower. You listen deeper. You choose differently. You say no without guilt. You say yes without fear. You create without needing applause. And slowly, you become not just a person, but a mirror, a reminder to others of what they've forgotten. Not by preaching, not by teaching, by being. And so the final realization is also the most terrifying. There is nothing left to become, only to become aware of what you already are. The game is over. The striving ends. And what remains is truth. Quiet, vast, uncompromising. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't need belief. It simply is. And now, so are you. The ego didn't ruin your life. It taught you what life is not. And in that sacred undoing, you found what it is. Welcome home.